Welcome back to the NWR Virtual Investor Conference. I'm Andrew Gagan from Auspice. Thanks for joining us. Our next company is Oventus Medical, ticker code OVN. It is a Brisbane-based medical device company that has developed a unique treatment platform for obstructive sleep apnea and snoring, a fast-growing market valued at $2.4 billion in the US alone. Oventus has a highly scalable model with low fixed costs and has used the COVID pandemic to develop a growing direct-to-consumer offering for patients. And just before we hear from both the Chief Executive and CEO, a reminder, if you'd like to ask questions after the presentation, do so by using the Q&A panel on your screen. Well, let's now hear from Managing Director and CEO, Dr. Chris Hart, and John Cox, the President and Chief Operating Officer of Oventus Medical. Chris.
Good on you. Thanks, Andrew. And listen, thanks everyone for taking the time to tune in. I know that it's a busy conference and a busy day, so I appreciate it. As Andrew said, we're a medical device company focused on the sleep apnea market. We have a proprietary technology, which is an enhanced oral appliance with some airway technology, integrated airway technology, and positive end expiratory pressure valve, which is a big name for regulating pressure and flow as we breathe, to stabilise the upper airway, as opposed to pumping air in with a mask and pump, which is what CPAP does, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that. For us, it's a $2.4 billion market just in the patients that have been diagnosed but that are no longer in care, and the addressable market's 5 times that. Like many companies in the respiratory field in the US in the last 12 months, it's been a little bit challenging with the world's greatest ever respiratory pandemic. However, we did manage to roughly double our unit sales and cash or booked revenue as well. And the way we did that was by developing an online platform and telehealth solution to be able to take our proprietary technology to patients within their home. CPAP, as many of you are aware, out of 100 patients diagnosed with CPAP, 35 would refuse, diagnosed with sleep apnea, 35 would refuse CPAP therapy. Out of the 65 that do trial it, around about 15 of them wouldn't make it through a 90-day trial. And out of the 50 that take a CPAP home, a bit over half of them will abandon therapy in the first 12 months. So it's very effective, but not always well tolerated. And there is an incredibly large need for an alternative therapy that's as effective as CPAP, more tolerable. And that's what we are bringing to market. As I said, it's an enormous market. Around about 30 million Americans suffer from sleep apnea, 1 in 5 diagnosed, and half of them not in therapy. It's growing at been double-digit CAGR for some time now, and we don't see that changing anytime soon, particularly with an aging population and increasing levels of obesity. Our technology, as opposed to forcing air in with a pump and a mask, we allow the air to flow through an integrated airway. And by allowing that air to flow, we're achieving similar physiologic outcomes, in fact, identical on one study to pumping air in with a mask. And when we go through this clinical data, some more of it I'll go through with you shortly, we've shown that it is as effective as CPAP for the vast majority of patients, and obviously worn nearly twice as much. Average wearing time 6.15 hours per night compared to 3.5 hours for a CPAP user who's an ongoing user, not including those that have abandoned therapy. So the effect on disease, or the mean disease alleviation, is arguably the best in market, being between 50 and 80% more effective than a standard mouthguard and worn nearly twice as much as CPAP. If we look at the market, we have these millions of patients that are diagnosed, they're not using therapy, and you'd say, well, why aren't more patients using a mouthguard? It is accepted as the second line of therapy after CPAP has been refused or the patients fail to adhere. And when we talk to sleep physicians about that, it's only 10% of the therapeutic market. And the sleep physicians will say, well, there's variable success rates. We're not guaranteed of success, and we're unsure about triaging patients into that therapy unless we know how it's going to turn out. There's also the issue of a complex patient journey. It involves a diagnosis by a sleep physician, often upon referral by a GP or a primary care physician, then a CPAP trial, CPAP abandonment, failure or refusal, oftentimes falling out of care or lost to follow-up, then consulting Dr. Google to try and find another solution, perhaps finding a dentist, And that dentist would need to have a knowledge base and skill set in oral appliance therapy. Patient may require another diagnosis as well. So it's a very complex patient journey traditionally. And then there's competing economic imperatives. If you speak to the sleep physician, they might say, well, I refer the patient to the dentist, so I'll never see them again. The dentist is going to charge a lot of money. And if you speak to dentists, why don't you refer to sleep physicians more often? They'll say, well, the patient will end up on CPAP and I'll never see the patient again. So we have this turf war. It really has been exacerbated in recent years. We don't need to go into too much of the details, but those two professions really are quite siloed. What we did in response to that is we set up a collaborative care model called the Lab in Lab program, which I'll get into shortly, where we share the care between the sleep physician and the dentist, and also share the revenue streams and profits. But what drove the original interest from sleep physicians is the fact that our Airway technology of the integrated 3D printed, custom designed Airway, in combination with a valve that controls exhalation called a positive end expiratory pressure valve. These two additions to oral appliance therapy in combination are increasing success rates from 56% to over 80%. And this is not just a slight change in the treatment paradigm, but it's a new treatment modality. And the sleep physicians are very excited about having a new treatment modality. CPAP-like effects contained within a mouth guard, in effect a CPAP in your pocket. And obviously worn nearly twice as much as CPAP. As I said, the mean disease alleviation is arguably best in market. As soon as we show the data to sleep physicians, the first thing they say is, well, how do we get our patients into care? Under a traditional model, we would have bounced around between referral centres and eventually, hopefully, gotten the patient into care. We had set up our original Lab in Lab program that we knew we could deliver these devices within a sleep facility where the patient was diagnosed. So we set about setting up digital scanners within the sleep facilities to scan the patients on site and obtain their patient records to manufacture the custom-made 3D printed airway management system for them. And that was gaining some good momentum. We have, I think, 80 sites representing a number of groups representing 80 sites contracted in North America. We have a marketing agency agreement across several thousand sites. So we were starting to launch these sites pre-COVID. Our revenue build was starting out. And obviously within 6 months of that launch, everything was shut down and had been for a year. The trend in market at the time was that there was more home sleep tests being done. There was more home sleep coaching of CPAP and drop shipping of CPAP. Patients were starting to get into virtual care, but the pandemic shutting down the vast majority of sleep facilities, because remember, sleep physicians, a lot of them are respiratory physicians, and many of them were tasked to dealing with COVID, and their facilities were virtually shut down overnight for basically a year. And so they switched to telehealth very quickly, and we followed as well. We started delivering our own intake and patient education online, and that's evolved now to the point where we can deliver our custom-made oral appliance in the patient's home under the remote supervision of both the sleep physician and the dentist. And importantly, we can share the revenue streams between all the stakeholders to make sure that everyone is rewarded for their part in that patient journey. And so while COVID did us a lot of harm in the last 12 months, and it's been very challenging, we did manage to double sales and revenue. I think we were expecting or hoping for more than that. I certainly underestimated the length of time COVID would impact us and the overall effect on the market. But what we've come out with now is a highly scalable, low-cost home care model that is available to everyone, anywhere, anytime. Add into that the recent recall from Philips Respironics, and we're looking at a 3 to 4 million unit shortage of CPAPs over the coming months and years as well. So it's almost a perfect storm for us to start to launch and scale this new virtual model. So we're very excited about the opportunity that is ahead of us, albeit it's been a very painful journey so far, or at least in the last 12 to 18 months. So the pandemic changed the market, and we had to respond more than once within that pandemic. We at first thought we could do telehealth intake and then still scan our patients on site when we got access again. It became apparent over time that we weren't going to get access, and we had a sales machine that was focused on conferences and physical site setups and launching sites. That no longer is the case. We now launch virtually. Our marketing, our patient recruitment is virtual, and we engage with our professionals virtually online as well, be they sleep physicians or dentists. So in response to that, we've reduced our cost base and our footprint. We've digitized the patient journey, and we're digitizing our sales and marketing efforts as well. And again, that's been a painful process, but we're now incredibly well positioned to generate the demand virtually, which is what the whole model is now focused on. We're also reviewing manufacturing to reduce costs. So we have three phases, really. We'll generate demand, which we've done and we're doing. We're now bringing the patients in care. We have just signed our first national in-network insurance contract in the US, and we work with some very large groups nationally in the US, Canada, and Australia. And we also market direct to consumer. So we have a very flexible business model that allows us to recruit patients irrespective of where they are in the patient journey. So whether they're at their primary care physician, suspecting sleep apnea or having a chronic snoring problem and other comorbidities, whether they're in a diagnostic sleep lab, if they're consulting with a sleep physician, maybe they're having a home sleep test, maybe they've been sent to a CPAP shop, a DME distributor of CPAP, they call them in the US, and these patients are trialing CPAP. Maybe they're struggling with CPAP, or maybe they've fallen out of care and they're in the general public. So irrespective of the point on which the patient is on their journey, we can recruit these patients into care using our virtual workflows. We work the patients up remotely. If they need a diagnosis, we work with our sleep diagnostic partners for that. If they need our therapy, we work with our dental partners for that. We can now ship impression kits under dental supervision. We can ship home sleep tests. We follow the patients up remotely. We have remarkable accuracy and fit rates of 98%, and the success rates of therapy are well over 80%. So it really is a highly scalable, low-cost clinical business model, delivering best-in-class technology anywhere, anytime, and now with access to national insurance contracts as well. And really now the next step is to refine these virtual channels to make sure that we can scale it in the way we wish to identify what our customer acquisition costs by channel, and then start to invest in that customer acquisition to scale and accelerate sales. And so we are really at the cusp, I think, of an expansion of our go-to-market program off the back of the very difficult and challenging time we've been through in COVID. It's certainly been difficult. The opportunity we have now is much, much greater than the opportunity we went into COVID with. We had contracts with several groups representing 80 to 90 sites. We'd launched over 40 of them at the moment. 29 are operational, including 7 virtual. Our telehealth intakes have grown, double-digit plus quarter on quarter since we launched it. We did 507 patient intakes were scheduled last quarter, and that's continuing to grow. Our conversion rates are crystallizing, and we have built a database of patients that we can now bring through the funnel and into care, particularly now that we are in network with major payers in the US. And our other programs are also very successful in Canada and Australia. These are our online properties, which we developed to pilot different arms of marketing in different markets in North America and Australia. It was a successful pilot. We're now in the scale-up phase. We're refining the online presence, redeveloping the marketing systems. And I'm very happy to have John Cox with us as President COO, very deep experience in online marketing in the sleep sector and bringing new devices, CPAP alternative therapies to market. So I'll hand off to John to let him talk more about the program as we intend to scale over the next coming months and years.
Chris, thank you very much. Well, I think as Chris said, the transition towards more patient-focused care was underway before COVID. But as you could imagine, going to 5 or 6 appointments between a sleep center, a doctor's office, and a DME in person during COVID wasn't really acceptable to patients. And they found very quickly that the infrastructure was there, but not the technology for them to do everything from the home. And so that's where Oventus sits. We sit with the best technology in the marketplace, but we also sit with a disruptive care model that allows us to serve patients, as Chris said, anywhere and anytime and any delivery channel they want without having to leave the home unless they want to see a dentist, and then we have something for them. So what we did in the US is the model that we're going to rubber stamp across the world, and that starts with direct-to-consumer demand generation, and that's to increase the number of patients we have in our funnel. They're easy to find online. They're all searching for care and searching for options because they don't like the current options, and they certainly are amenable to direct-to-consumer marketing and then conversion. And so for us, it's about grabbing the patient at the point of decision. Either they're tired of CPAP, looking for something new, or they're newly diagnosed. And we're building models around attracting those patients, motivating them, and bringing them into care with Oventus. This has been all pretty much agnostic to how they get care, whether it's the virtual model, which we've exploited to create great opportunities and pathways for patients who want to be seen. And we're now doing the first and only really virtual model from beginning to end in the United States, and that pilot is underway. Next slide. So what is it about when you go to digital marketing in this space? Well, it's no different than any other consumer product, which has millions of incidences like CPAP or sleep apnea. You're going to measure your customer acquisition cost, and then you're going to use the model to improve it over time. And this is what you see here. In just a few months, we've gone from what you would see as a pretty standard customer acquisition cost as a trial, and then we've been able to drive it down over a bunch of iteration in the last couple of months. And where we expect to go from here is take those patients who are interested and have a seamless patient journey, one branded experience with our product and service together, and we think we can cut that customer acquisition cost considerably lower as we grow. And I think we'll have what we think is a scalable model with good numbers behind it in the United States that we can extrapolate to all markets before the end of the year. Chris, I think that's it on my side.
Thanks, John. I'm sure there'll be some questions about that later. You can see here, we were starting to scale. We actually only got FDA clearance for the Oventus Optima in Q2 FY20. We were starting to scale, and then we're hit by COVID in Q4 FY20. We used telehealth then to continue to engage with patients, and we managed to continue to grow as we came out of COVID or through COVID, because we're not out of it yet. And then in the last quarter or so, we started to scale up our direct-to-consumer marketing. There was some perceived channel conflict with our dental customers that we sell direct to. We think they'll come back to the table very soon, particularly given that they are the end user and beneficiary of the patients that we recruit. So we're sharing the revenue with all of the stakeholders. Our conversion rates dropped off a little bit as we went direct to consumer because we were casting the net further. And many of the patients we engaged with needed a new diagnosis. So they end up going off into the diagnostic part of the funnel, and they'll be coming back into therapy in the coming weeks and months. Very importantly, as I said, we now have access to in-network contracts with national insurers, and we have coverage across 50 states in the US, both in person and virtually. So it's taken us a little while to build that out. We started building that out at the end of last year. Now, 6-7 months down the track, we have national coverage and we're in network. So we're very excited to be able to recruit patients from anywhere in their patient journey, send them to the part of our organisation that makes the most sense to them, and then to bring them into care with them utilising their insurance coverage to pay for therapy, or for the vast majority of it. So we're looking now to crystallise that customer acquisition cost across channels. We have a floor that we don't go below in the lab-in-lab and virtual lab-in-lab program, but in the direct-to-consumer channel, we believe we can drive that customer acquisition cost lower again. And that will in turn allow us to scale our revenue and accelerate sales. So, we're going to increase investment in our marketing. We're going to buy more customers. We want to get to the point where we buy them for X dollars. We generate, at the moment, it's around $550. We generate a couple of $1,000s worth of revenue. We retain nearly half of that, and at the moment, it's at about a 50-60% mix or blended gross margin. We're going to drive down our costs as we go on, reduce our fixed costs and reduce our acquisition costs, so we can increase the patients in the funnel by increasing marketing. We can increase conversion rates by reducing the out-of-pockets to patients, and then we can scale that predictably, knowing that if we spend, let's say, $1 and we get $2 to $3 of gross profit back, we're going to accelerate that investment in sales growth. And we believe that we'll have that equation or visibility on it in the second half of this year, before the end of the calendar year. Our board and team in the US, Jake Nunn, Paul Malloy, and John, who you've just spoken to, Paul being very hands-on and operative, Jake being the financial mindset. We have great support from our US directors and our executive team, as well as our Australian directors, Sue McClam and Mel Bridges, who many of you know, I'm sure, and Steve Gennaro, a very experienced company secretary. Our patients, of course, is why we're here. We get thousands of very happy patients. I just had a physician from Pennsylvania last week let me know that he dropped his AHI, or the number of times he stops breathing, an hour, from 80 to 11, which was better than what he got on CPAP. He owns a network of concussion clinics across 4 states, and he's now implementing that across his concussion patients to help them recover from concussion. He actually said to me, you know, it saved his life during COVID. He had COVID and wore it during the day when he had COVID. So, you know, we get this type of feedback continually, and he will be interviewing him actually as part of our go-to-market process on the East Coast. So we get great feedback from patients. It's a phenomenal technology, and now we're able to deliver it to people anywhere, anytime with national reimbursement, access to national reimbursement contracts. So I'll pause there and I'll stop sharing my screen, and happy to take any questions.
Chris, John, thanks very much for the presentation. Yeah, okay, let's get to the questions. And Chris, at the top there, you were talking about the attrition rate with CPAP devices. A question in relation to that, of what studies can you point to which show that the Oventus device is tolerated significantly more than CPAP? What sort of percentage of patients stick with your device?
Sure. So 82% of users are still using it habitually at the end of 1 year. The average wearing time is 6.15 hours a night, or 7 hours a night, 6 nights a week on average. And that's across 2 separate studies. That's in line with the peer-reviewed literature on oral appliance therapy.
And can you talk through the process of how a client is scanned or assessed?
Sure. So irrespective of where they are, they'll either be scheduled on our telehealth platform by maybe a respiratory care therapist, a sleep physician, a medical assistant, a GP, it doesn't really matter. Or they may have come across us online and they'll schedule themselves on our online platform. From there, we'll engage with them. There will be a telehealth assessment with one of our clinical educators. And if appropriate, we will organise a sleep study if needed, or we will schedule them either for a scan in one of our facilities, or we'll ship them a home impression kit for the dentist supervised home impression process. Once the device is manufactured, it gets shipped either again to the facility or the patient's home, and the patient can be guided on how to use it either in person or remotely by a telehealth conference again. We then follow the patients up over a 90-day period to ensure compliance and efficacy, and often we will supply the patient with a home sleep test or refer them back to their referring physician for standard of care follow-up sleep studies to ensure that the therapy is effective enough.
And do you offer customers the chance to try before they buy?
We don't have a trial because it is custom made and it's not able to be used again, unlike a CPAP. Having said that, the data we have shows that success rates are actually over 90% now, up from 80%. And the number of returns we have actually, you know, I've been doing it now for 7 years and I can count them on one hand. So we do have very high success rates and high patient compliance.
Just a question in relation to what you've described as in-network with payers. Can you describe what that means?
So similar to Australia, you know, if you are maybe with Bupa and you want to get some dentistry done, you go to a Bupa, I don't think they called them preferred providers now, but you go to a Bupa clinic and your out-of-pocket costs will be much lower than if you went to a dentist who's not contracted to Bupa. And the similar scenario exists in the US, but much more difficult to access in-network insurance coverage as a device company. So what's happening as of very recently, and as in now, patients will pay. We did have some sites in network, but the majority were out of network, where the out-of-pocket costs would be north of 50, 60%, and consequently our conversion rates were about 50%. In the sites where we were in network, there's minimal out-of-pocket expenses to the patient, maybe a couple of $100s. And so in those sites, we had 85% conversion rates. What being in network nationally means is that in 48 states across the US, the out-of-pocket expenses for patients, irrespective of whether they come from a lab-in-lab program, a virtual lab-in-lab program, or it's a direct-to-consumer sale, they'll have minimal out-of-pocket expenses for their therapy. And of course, you always have a lot higher acceptance rates, 85% is our experience, when the therapy is underwritten by their insurance. Patients feel like they rightly deserve to have access to their insurance to receive therapy.
Yeah, just a question how that relates to those in Australia. Out-of-pocket costs, is there any reimbursement system here?
In Australia, it's reimbursed under private dental insurance extras cover, and it's highly variable. Coverage in Australia is usually about the 30 to 40% mark. Because we do sell online and we don't have any fixed facility costs, we have the ability to be very competitive on a cash price basis across all markets, whether that's Australia, the US, or Canada. We can offer up to a $1,000 discount to therapy and still be no worse off in terms of gross margins if we sold the device through the dental channel.
And just in terms of pricing, how much leverage do you have over the price of devices?
So we sell the device to a dentist or to a clinic in the US and Canada. In Australia, we can sell direct to the customer. Our pricing that we sell to the clinic is around about $550 US, 650 Canadian dollars, and around about 650 Australian dollars. We also run the clinical service business, which generates anywhere from an extra $300 to $800 revenue off the provision of services to run the virtual or fixed facility clinics. And we make a margin on that as well, that on average is around about 50%. The current margins on the device are running at about 60% or 55 to 60% gross profit margin. So blended gross profit margins around about 50 to 55%. And depending on the structure, the country and the channel, we would retain anywhere from $900 up to $1,400 in the country's given currency for both the device delivery and the provision of service in our lab-in-lab, virtual lab-in-lab, and direct-to-consumer models.
And Chris, can you just update us with the FDA approval process in the States?
So Optima is FDA cleared. I'll assume that that question is based on the clearance of XVent, which is our positive end expiratory pressure valve. That is cleared in the rest of the world outside China, and we are in active review of our application with the FDA at the moment. They got back to us last month. We have some questions to answer, which is almost always the case. In fact, I've never had a 510K come back with a green tick first time round. The key question is around our clinical evidence, which we're reviewing to see whether it's devices or whether they want some more recent evidence. If they do want more recent evidence, we have some more recent evidence. We also have a number of patients in care across some clinical trial sites that we could do some follow-up studies if needed. And the FDA has indicated that if there is evidence, further evidence required, it would be a light touch. So we are not far away from XVent approval in the US.
Chris and John, thanks for the presentation. And thanks for joining us from Oventus Medical.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it.